I'm stoked. I'm honored. I'm truly happy to welcome a dear friend of the cigar industry, a brother of the leaf, and a fellow journalist and a super well-known influencer and blogger from the United States, William Cooper from Cigar Coop. Welcome to Light 'em Up, and thank you so much for taking the time and being here with us tonight.
Well, thank you for the opportunity as well. I wish we were able to somehow do this in person. But this is the next best thing, right? So we're still having great conversation, great people, great cigars. But thanks for the opportunity. I've been looking forward to this for a very long time.
Brilliant. Well, thank you so much for the kind words, and I couldn't agree more. It would be fabulous to do this in person, and this is definitely a plan that we'll keep in the back of our minds for better days in the near future, hopefully. But speaking of better days, you have actually been doing Cigar Coop for well over 10 years. You celebrated your 10th birthday and anniversary this year, right? So first of all, congratulations on that. But what I'm curious to know is, in the first place, did you have any idea what you were getting yourself into?
Oh, absolutely not. Cigar Coop was originally a blog that was going to be a short-term project to chronicle my experience at the 2010 IPCPR trade show. That's what it was intended to be. I was going to have a short-term 3-month thing, kind of document the record out there in the World Wide Web of my experience, and that would be it. It didn't turn out like that, so it ended up, turning into a project that I never would have imagined.
But something positive, I could imagine, and something that had a tremendous impact on your life, obviously.
Yeah, it's the cigar industry is a small. We all know about the cigar industry. It's a small industry, right? So it's easy to kind of get noticed in the cigar industry compared to other industries. And, I was surprised I got noticed from that little short-term blog that I did chronicling the trade show, where people, they suddenly they wanted me to start reviewing their cigars. Eventually I was starting to get press releases coming. And then the thing just evolved and just kept evolving to a point where it has become a second job. Not something by any means I regret. It's something you have to enjoy. If you're going to do what we do, we have to enjoy the media aspects as much as the cigar aspects. Because if you don't enjoy the media aspects, this is going to get old very quickly, and you're not going to be around.
That's actually a very interesting point, a couple of very interesting points. First of all, you do not only run Cigar Cube for a living, but also follow other career paths. So what does that mean in terms of workload? How do you split your day? Or, for the people who have never ran a blog or a live show like the one that you do, that's a full-time job in itself, isn't it? How do you manage that? How do you balance that?
You have to kind of keep them in separate lanes. So, and the thing is, my day job is the day job, and Cigar Coop is the night and weekend job. And it's, like I said, it's just turned out like that. I have brought in some help in terms of some of the other things you have to do when a website grows. So I have technical help. I don't have to deal with that. I have bookkeeping help for finances and things like that. And I do have proofreaders now that I use. So I brought in some other help there, and that alleviates some of it. But it's still a lot of work where, I come back when I'm done with work, it's another 4 or 5 hours every night that I'm doing this. So, like I said, you have to love it. And there's times I do have to just take a break, and people say, well, how come my cigar hasn't been reviewed? I'm like, well, I'm resting right now, and I got very sick 2 years ago. And what happened is I didn't recognize the importance of sleep. And sleep is something that your body needs to kind of recharge and fight off bad things like infections. And I got a very bad blood infection, and I had to make some lifestyle changes after that. So, I did slow it down a bit. People might not notice it, but I actually did slow it down. So you do have to kind of take care of yourself as well.
I also realized that when you have a regular schedule, when you run a weekly show or people are used to consuming your content on a regular basis, it's sort of an obligation. I mean, it's a wonderful one, but do you sometimes feel the pressure of having to stick to a certain schedule? And especially when you mentioned when you're sick or you just don't feel like it at some point, still you got to keep the show running. You got to keep the engine
Yeah.
going.
Yeah, when I got sick, the mistake, like, we publish every day. We've published every day for 8 years. And when I got sick, the publishing kept going, and that was only because there was so much backlog that was done that, and I was hospitalized, so that was able to keep going. But, again, you do have to kind of recognize those types of things. You need to take it. I don't think I would keep it going next time. I think I would definitely slow it down and,
Right.
take a break if I'm in a hospital again, because there was still stuff that had to be done to publish, is what I'll just say. So
Obviously, yeah.
you learn from that for sure. But yeah, to go
Interesting.
back, answer your question, the other part of the coin though is a regular schedule. One is it keeps you disciplined,
Hmm.
and your audience and your followers, they don't have to ask where you are. And the reason why we go every day is because I've seen so many online media guys come and go that, if you're doing this and you're making a commitment to audience and sponsors, you have to keep some sort of a regular schedule. Podcasting's, we can't do 7 days a week of podcast. It's just too much. But
Yeah.
but we try to keep almost every week to have at least one podcast, as I've seen you do as well.
Mhm. Exactly. So looking back 10 years ago when you started, you mentioned it's probably a bit easier to get recognized in the cigar industry because it's a small industry. But do you feel that there's certain ups and downs? Obviously, in the boom days, the industry as a whole was just going from strength to strength. But do you also see certain ups and downs in terms of the media side, where it's a bit more popular to start a cigar blog or start a cigar podcast? And what does like how do you manage to stand out from that and still be there 10 years after that?
Okay. I'll answer that in two parts. So there's definitely been ups and downs, right? But let me kind of answer the second part of it first. To stand out, you kind of have to do something that's going to make you different. There is a gentleman who was in the cigar industry. He owned a company called Nomad Cigars. His name is Fred Rui. You may have seen him on social media. He wrote a book called Be the Lime. And he basically said that there's a lot of lemons out there, but to stand out, you have to be the lime. So you have to do something that's going to be different and that's going to bring people to your brand and not just be a rehash of what you do. So that's, I think, very important what I've done, whether it's 365 days a year, whether it's very product centric coverage at the IPCPR is what we've done as opposed to personality things. Um, and changing with the times is also important. That, along the way, when I started, the blogs were what everyone was doing, and over the past few years, podcast and YouTube has started to now become more popular because it's a lot easier and less expensive to do those types of things than writing. And writing has a lot of like I said, I have to have proofreaders and stuff like that. So I think Cigar Coop has done those things, addressing those other mediums. I think the next thing we would do is, and I don't know when that's what would happen, it's probably something with a mobile app we would have next. That's probably the one piece we're missing right now. But I think it is important to stand out and then be able to keep up with the times.
Mhm. Which certainly is not always easy. I mean, that's a hell of a job. And you also need to at some point just take the risk or have the courage to start and get into the rhythm, and then the platform will evolve as you go. But interestingly enough, like not every communication channel or vessel suits everybody as a consumer, but also as the producer of the content. Do
Right.
you sometimes feel like you're more comfortable with either the writing part, or do you prefer voice, which is now gaining a lot of momentum after YouTube was that big, and it still is, but voice certainly got a lot more traction.
Yeah, I think I'm more comfortable with the writing part for sure. Uh, I always kind of like to go back, and I think written stuff is it's still the best way to have a record of something, and it's easy to search on. It's something if you're on a train or a bus you can consume. Um, so I think it makes it. I like that format. I do like writing as well. I think writing kind of gives you just there's a certain craft and a tool to that. Podcasting, the voice is different. I think the voice is different and it serves a different purpose. So what I've found is, like for example, on Cigar Coop, there's reviews and news. And I think reviews and news works really well on a website. I don't think it works as well on a podcast, to believe it or not. I think especially news, I don't find that part to be all like I don't find someone's going to tune into my podcast to hear me break a story. I don't think that we're there, but I do think that the podcast allows you to have conversations like we're having right now. And that's something I think that you can't really do in a written form.
Mhm.
And just being able to kind of go a little off script on an interview. I think there's something to say that, and I think you get to the personal side of things better on the podcast. So both of them, I really feel have a place, but I wouldn't try to make one into the other. Like I've sometimes done the written interviews, and I don't think they're as powerful as the voice interviews. So it's a two. I think they each have a purpose.
When you look back at the 10 years of Cigar Coop now, and your own history and story within the cigar industry, how do you feel the industry as a whole has changed and evolved?
Well, I think the industry. I'll talk about from an industry standpoint. There's a lot. There's a lot more brands out there. Even with FDA in the U.S., there's a lot more than there was in 2010. The biggest, we've seen certain companies really start to like. It doesn't matter if the company's big or small. There are companies out there that have been able to connect with consumers over those past 10 years on like online media. I think Drew Estate's a great example of that. I think we're starting to see Fuente make that move now, which Fuente for a long time didn't have that. So, I think, and I think a lot of these bigger companies, it's like a old dog, new tricks kind of thing, which is important. So I think we're seeing how they communicate with not just media, but with consumers. I think that's changing as well. The big thing that I think was happened in the industry, that I think the big story that I've seen over the last 10 years, cigar wise, is this idea of I see a lot less brand building today in the US. Like 10 years ago, I think most of these cigar releases were about brand building, right? Now we're kind of seeing these limited releases. They're more gimmicky. Um, they don't put a lot of marketing into them at all. They don't put a lot of brand building into all. They get cigars out of a factory. They package them nicely, and with the packaging, they're able to connect with the good cigars, but they're able to connect with the consumers. And that's the biggest change I've seen over the last 10 years in the U.S. Where 2010, you really didn't see that much, and now it's this small batch. Let's put something cool out, but move on and then put something else cool out. That's a huge. I think that's a huge shift what I've seen in the last 10 years.
So where do you think does that come from? Is it because like there might be a little more bravado behind the brands who do that, or is it because of changing and evolving consumer behavior?
I think what's happened is the small companies, and this really, I think the company that really made this popular was Caldwell, with the Lost and Found series, where they took an approach of we're getting very good cigars, and we're gonna, they'd had some success already. We're getting very good cigars. We're connecting with our audience, so we're reaching out to our audience on social media, and we're just putting something that's very attentive, and it works very well. I've seen some of the bigger companies do it and haven't been as successful because I don't think they connect I don't think it's just a matter of slapping a sticker on a paper bundle and making it cool. I think you got to have a connection there. And I think companies like Caldwell, they've really led the way in terms of, you could argue if the cigars are good or not, but they have found a way to make these releases work. And companies have seen the success of it. And now we're seeing other companies start to do this more and more right now.
As a matter of fact, how do you then see that impact the work that you've been doing with Cigar Coop and the role of cigar media in general?
How have I seen that change?
Yes, and how the evolution of the industry that you were just describing
Yeah.
had an impact on the way you have to think about cigar media.
Yeah. So this is what I saw happen. I get into it in 2010, especially when I start getting into the news piece. And the first thing you discover right off the bat is the bigger companies have a set way of doing things. They used to send a fax or pick up the phone and send a communication to a big print magazine. And that was the extent of how they would communicate with the media and hope it would get set up. Then the smaller companies start to pop up in the early part of the decade, and they kind of see social media a lot quicker, and they start interfacing with online media. And they get a lot more publicity than they would have had like in 2005, 2010, 2012. They're getting a lot more publicity. It makes it easier for a guy like me now to get content because I have this option. But then came the option of, we want to try to reach out to those companies that have been doing, the bigger companies, the older companies that have been doing this for a long time. And that's something we had to do over time. It was a patient process with that, to do that. Specifically, when I was talking about these small batch releases, these, it's very easy for a small batch release to get communicated to online media. Online media can get something out very quickly. Don't have to spend a lot of cycles on it. Print media, not so much. Print media is not really interested in that because sometimes by the time the print media publishes, the release is gone. So there's not a point in them spending cycles. So they were never really that interested in that. But that presented opportunity for guys like me to kind of say, all right, there's a market for some of this stuff and we can cover it. Then eventually it was just a matter of continuing to just knock on doors with the bigger companies. And that seems to have started, that patience has paid off in the last couple of years. I mean, there are companies like Alec Bradley, JC Newman, Fuente, that we have relationships with that maybe 6 years ago I thought would never happen. So you just kind of had to stay with that and keep knocking on, not ignore that piece, but keep doing it. Some online media guys got very frustrated and they didn't want to cover some of the bigger companies. And I think it was their loss that they did that. I just kept patient with that, and it seems to be paying off.
Do you think that there's sort of a critical point that you need to reach as an online media or a new kid on the block in the cigar media segment, and you have to get past a certain point in order to be recognized and get some traction and be acknowledged by the manufacturers as well in order to even get their feedback, their response, or news updates?
Yeah, you have to be, I think it's a matter of, you got to be consistent there. Like, so part of what I said is, I publish every day, but there are guys that publish on a regular schedule, maybe not every day. And I think companies just want to see that you're going to be there in 6 months. I think there's a lot of these online guys, they've come out like gangbusters and they're gone in 30 to 60 days. And I think companies have a little nervous about making those types of relationships. So I think, if those relationships are going to happen, they want to see that you're going to be out there for a while and do that. You don't have to necessarily love them. I've learned this part very easy. You don't have to give them all great reviews. You don't have to do that. I think you just got to be fair with them. I think if you fair with the review, and if there's a story out there, especially if it's a controversial one, be sure you connect with them on that, right? And I think if you kind of show those types of things, those relationships, then the respect starts to come back right now.
I think that is a very important aspect that you mentioned there, the mutual respect and understanding that we're all in this together as one big cigar
Yeah.
family, and the industry as a whole is highly contested through external players already. So internally, at least, it's all about supporting each other, and also what we're trying to build is just a platform where people from all around the world can connect and get together in a most positive way, right?
Yeah, I like I said, I love what you guys are doing, because I'm learning about the international market. I mean, you just had Eric on, right? What a fantastic interview that was, right? I mean, and I've known Eric for a while, but I've never seen him on an interview. And the fact that you have this platform and it's different than what we're seeing here in the States, it's great. And I think there's room for all. That's why a lot of us, we're friends. We're not really enemies in the online media. We compete, but we're not enemies. And I think when there's been a problem, most of us have joined forces to try to help the other people out. And that's just how it's been for most of the 10 years I've done.
When you started, did you feel like you actually had support from the very beginning, from some of the other media that were already established, or certain people that you could always connect with to bounce off ideas of each other, or just get some feedback and support?
That took a while, because the guys in 2010 got burned by so many people coming in and out the door, right? That I think they're like, oh, here comes another guy, right? So I had to be patient with that. A lot of those guys are my friends today. But I think I had to earn their trust and respect to do that. So it wasn't like right away. I mean, if I did ask a question, it wasn't like I was ignored. But in terms of, really kind of building that trust, I think it had to be earned. And certainly I had to put in my time to earn it.
You mentioned competition as well. I recently saw that you, together with a couple of colleagues from the industry, you all came up with a certain sampler that everybody sort of offered, and then there was this slight competition going on. Other than that, how does that competitive feeling sort of come through? Where does it shine? How do you guys connect and interact with each other?
Well, it's interesting. That was a very unique competition. I don't think any industry had ever gotten 6 media guys to say, put together a product, and then this retailer will see who could sell the most product. I don't think that's happened in any industry before. So there are times, sometimes it got a little contentious, right? But I think in the end, most of the guys supported the other guys. I think we all shook hands on that. There were a couple things I didn't like about the contest, but I don't think anyone like cheated or anything and broke rules. It was just there were a lot of loopholes with that, and that sometimes caused a little friction with that. But in the end, like a few of us just did a show together recently, where we kind of all got together, and we were the Cigar Dojo guys. The guy who won from Cigar Props, Cigar Dojo, Blind Man's Puff, and myself were doing a show. So, and we had a great show that night. So, and that was after the competition's over. So, I think in the end, and some of us bought some of the other guys' sampler packs too. So there was a little fun with that too. That we did some things with that. To keep it kind of light, as well. It was meant to be fun, is what it should have been. And I think I learned a lot from it. I enjoyed it. If they ever asked me to do it again, I didn't finish very well in it, by the way, but I got such a great experience. And the other experience I got from that was the audience, just those who took the time to put a picture of it on social media, to send me a message saying they really liked the selections. That was the part that really. It really touched me a lot. And that was something I didn't expect I would get from something like that. So yeah, there was maybe some little trash talking going on time to time. A couple times it maybe got contentious, but nothing where I think really bad either.
I think it was a fabulous project, and I watched the show that you mentioned where you all got together after the results came in. Now, what's interesting about the project is it's probably an opportunity, and a very rare opportunity, for you, who normally does reviews and talk about the industry, to bring to the forefront some of your personal preferences as well, and to sort of resemble your palate and and your preferences in terms of cigars, aromas, and flavors in a tangible product like the actual sampler. Normally, how do you balance, how do you handle your personal preferences in terms of cigar profiles when you also need to keep an independent voice because you're doing all these reviews and you're talking about other brands?
Yeah, that's a big problem in the media right now. In that, you hear stuff about getting free samples and sponsors, but I think the big problem is sometimes the relationships that are built. Not, and I'm talking about the good relationships that are built, because then if you're buddy buddy and it shows that you're buddy buddy, then it shows you may have a bias. So that's a tricky part you have to manage when you're doing something like this. Is you can't show favoritism for a brand. I even like I said, it's like picking a cigar like this Aganorsa leaf I'm smoking. Someone may say, well, why didn't you pick my cigar? Why didn't you pick someone else's cigar? So that becomes very tricky, and you have to just stick to your guns and not and try to be as neutral as possible. I don't like saying this is my favorite brand here or there for that reason, because um I could get into some trouble, and feelings get hurt very easy. With the sampler, you're right. I based it on a lot of my profile. I put a sampler together with brands that have their own factory, with brands that have been around for 25 years, because I love the brand building aspects of the cigar industry. So based on those, that was why I picked what I picked in my sampler. And I had to fit them into a price point and availability and things like that too. But so yeah, you really have to try to be as neutral as possible. You're gonna have people you're friends with in the industry. You're gonna have people that you're not friends with in the industry. But you can't show your cards either way with that. You have to kind of go down the middle and let your audience decide if you're truly neutral or not.
Reviews in that sense are always a challenging topic, right? Because there will be not necessarily conflicting interests, but potential overlaps is here and there. As you mentioned, certain friendships that you develop within the industry. So especially in such a closed industry, it's gonna be hard to keep that neutral standpoint and that independence. Do you feel that for Cigar Coop in particular, are the reviews really the bread and butter, or what people are mostly looking for when they jump on a media site or follow a certain podcast and YouTube channel?
I think a lot of people look for that. Yeah, I think the reviews are the piece that people look for. I think what going back to what I said, the lime before, the lime is my news piece. And where my news piece is different is my news is I'm taking news directly from the source. I'm not rehashing news that was printed elsewhere or just copying a press release. I'm doing validation on it. So I still think that people they look at news, but I think in the end, the reviews are still the foundation of what's done on Cigar Coop. And I think it's very important to recognize that. So the reviews will never go away. And it's important that the reviews are done well and they're done accurately. And, because I find that news a year later, people aren't going back and looking at, but reviews 3, 4, 5 years later, there's still traffic going to those things.
How do you feel about various criteria with those reviews? There's obviously scoring ranges that people are familiar with, and certain systems like a 100-point system that most media platforms would apply to their reviews. Yet there is no such thing as an industry standard. Um, how can we even draw a fair comparison between certain platforms there? Or do you probably think there should be something like an industry standard for scoring where um, people could even out certain aspects that they see from different platforms?
I think I'm not the biggest fan of the 100-point system, but the 100-point system is the baseline in the U.S. and probably in Europe. I mean, so Cigar Aficionado, Cigar Journal, they've set the stage with that, with the 100-point system. So I've seen it, like my partner Aaron, he has a very different scoring system. And I love the fact that he's tried to change the scoring system, but he'll tell you how challenging it's been to change the mindset. People still go back and they look at that 100-point system the way Cigar Aficionado does it. What's happened, though, is this is where it's been a problem, is scoring with a lot of the smaller sites is much higher than, let's say, a Cigar Aficionado or Cigar Journal. Cigar Coop fell into that category as well. Our scoring was high. And what happened is suddenly something where a 90 is considered a standard of excellence became not a good score. And there was a problem there. 90 should not be a below average score. So things have had to change where I've kind of, again, go look at what Cigar Aficionado has done. Any cigar they rate 91 or higher is something that's eligible for Cigar of the Year. I've taken the same approach. So scoring on Cigar Coop changed over the past few years where it's gotten lower. But it wasn't to punish anything. It was just, we wanted to be in line where if someone got that 91 or 92, it was as special as getting it from an aficionado to some extent, So, and scoring is, we can all say, people will say they don't look at scores. They absolutely look at scores. Mm-hmm. They absolutely look at them. People say they don't read reviews. Those are the people who are reading the reviews. I love it because then, here's the last thing I'll say on that. A standard system, I'm in favor of having some maybe basic principles, but there still does need to be some level of subjectivity. So for what I do versus what Charlie does at Half Wheeled or what maybe Aficionado's doing, I think there's still got to be a level of subjectivity because people want to know what the reviewer is thinking, and the reviewer may not be, we all may have a different way of looking at that. So maybe some good foundations in terms of a framework, but still have that level of subjectivity where we could be individuals and review it.
No, absolutely. I definitely agree there. But then you almost have to compare ratings solely within one particular publication or within one particular platform, right? Because otherwise it's going to be hard to say what's a 94 on this platform. It has to be sort of similar to a 94 on another platform, correct?
Yeah. There was a question in the chat from Sebastian. What's the difference between 89 and 90? Huge. It's huge because so many people have now basically looked at 89 as you missed. So it's a big difference. It's a quantum leap, is what I'll say. It could be the difference of someone putting you on a shelf talker or not. That's how big it is.
And one thing we need to realize is that a high scoring or a high rating and making it to one of the top 25 lists can be a totally different ball game for a manufacturer and can change their business dramatically.
Yeah, no, it really does. Look, Cigar Aficionado and Cigar Journal have a very comprehensive process. They're different. Cigar Coop has a comprehensive process, but I wish it could be as like one of those two. I just don't have the resources, to do that. So Cigar Aficionado has a team that they put in play. Cigar Journal uses ambassadors, I guess, around the world that they pick to do the blind tasting. So so they're comprehensive, and you have to respect that they both have a process, we have a process. A lot of the online media guys today don't. It's not as much of a process. This is what I like to smoke, that's fine too. But you have to. Sometimes I don't think you can compare because they're so different the way they're done. But in the end, they're still ranking the cigars 1 to 25.
Yeah. I have a follow-up question on that, but first I would love to bring in Ian, who's here at the lounge with us, and he also has a question for you.
Yeah, sure.
Thanks, Coop. On the subject of reviews, it's a bit like wine reviews and tastings. I think you just find somebody who's got a taste that you like and then follow them. I don't think there will ever be uniformity because, as you say, it's subjective. And also, given how, even with Cigar Aficionado, from one year to the next, a cigar which is number one year is nowhere the next year. So, it's obviously not just, a completely objective test. And there are certain makers, I love Steve Sacker's stuff, but some people may not like it. I don't like extremely big cigars, and I don't like extremely strong cigars, but some people love them. So, you know, it's always going to depend on the smoker at the end of the day.
Yeah, a couple comments on it, Ian. Really good comments. First of all, if you're a reviewer and you're reviewing a 60 ring gauge cigar, and the first thing you say is, I don't like 60 ring gauge cigars, I don't think that should be, if you're a cigar consumer that's looking at a 60 ring gauge cigar and like it, he's probably not the reviewer for you right out of the gate. So I think that's extremely important to to kind of recognize with that, because it's, you do right. There is a comparison that you're gonna have with that. You're definitely gonna have certain reviewers you're gonna be more comfortable with than others. And I recognize that every consumer may not be comfortable with what I'm doing, and that's important. You can't take it personally, right? But that's important to know that.
Yeah, but I mean, on the other end, some people love Lanceros, but
Right.
The most popular cigars, I think, are of the the Robustos and the Toros. But I find a great Lancero can be very flavoursome. It's not such a long smoke, but it really is very, very good. And they're harder to roll, so you get better rollers,
Yeah.
and they're skillful. So they have their place. But some guys out on the golf course wouldn't be seen dead with a Lancero because it just looks.
Yeah.
But it can be a great cigar.
Yeah, let me address the other point you mentioned too about how can a cigar be ranked number one year and the next year not show up on the list, right? Well, first of all, I think that any cigar that gets ranked number one should be in contention the following year, right? I don't know how Aficionado does that, but what I will say is cigars with the same blend will change from year to year as crops change, as vintages change. And the best example I could tell people is the year Monte Cristo #2 got #1 from Cigar Aficionado. If you were smoking Monte Cristo #2s in 2013, and you knew that cigar was excelling. It was smoking at another level that maybe it wasn't smoking a couple of years before that. So I think that's a part that gets lost sometimes. It shouldn't be what's maybe the best new cigar, but what's the best performing cigar? And that's something that I think that Cigar Aficionado in their system has that's a lot more unique. But sometimes I've seen cigars excluded from like coming back into their tasting process the following year. And I think that's where I'd like to see if this got #1 in 2013, what will a 2014 version of that do? That's the part I think that's missing, unfortunately.
But I think that makes the point then that for the consumer looking at a review, you're not going to get the same cigar that's being reviewed if you're looking at it a year or two later. It's going to be a different cigar.
Definitely. It's so important. Like sometimes people have stuff in their humidor, they'll buy it off a retail store that maybe that cigar's been sitting in there 8, 9, 10 months. And it's not like, well, it's not smoking like what I saw in Cigar Aficionado. That has a lot to do with that.
Thank you.
Thank you. That was a good points.
Many thanks for that comment, and it sort of ties perfectly into the question that I wanted to bring up. How do you go about blind tasting versus openly tasting the cigar, and you know what it is that you have in hand?
Yeah, with blind tasting, you need to have, again, it comes down to the process, right? So I don't blind taste because you do need there's a lot of work that goes into that. Aaron, my former, my current partner, had a former website. He was a partner in Blind Man's Puff, which does that. And I could tell you the amount of work that they had to put in, taking bands off, putting, other, numbers on them, making sure the cigars got out to people. It's completely different. Now, I've done blind reviews, and it definitely changes things. There's no doubt about it, because you have no preconceived notions. Like if I'm reviewing a Fuente Opus X cigar, and I know it's an Opus X, there's certain things I look for in an Opus X. Mm-hmm. Same thing with a Padron or a Steve Saka cigar. There's things I'm looking for with that, right? But those things are gone when you do a blind review. I think blind reviews are great. I think they're a great part of what you do. That's why I love what Cigar Journal does with theirs, with their reviews, and then how they do the top 25 at the end of the year. It's usually, that's a lot tough. Like the aficionado list is easier to pick than the Cigar Journal list because you just don't know what the blind thing is going to bring.
Yeah.
It brings a whole other wild card into it.
And you're definitely right. It's a hell of a process. And I mean, I can't applaud Nikki enough, who's in charge of the getting the samples ready for the Cigar Journal tasting panel. And all those cigars are sampled blindly and smoked blindly, sent to people all over the world. So it definitely changes everything. But interestingly enough, I mean, I always feel like there is no real blind tasting because ultimately you're going to know the ring size, you're going to know the color of the wrapper, and that might already cause certain preconceptions. You mentioned the 60s before, right? If you already know you're not going to like a 60, and even though it's a blind tasting, but you get a 60, there is a certain preconception. And the same might be true for Connecticut.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Right?
Yeah, that's a great point you make as well. You know, there are some disadvantages to blind tasting reviews. I find a lot of people, they want to learn about they want to like Google and find a picture of the cigar with the band that you're looking at. They want to understand a little of the backstory with the cigar. It's a little tougher to do that when you have a cigar without. You have to. You could fix the process to do that, but I think some of that gets a little lost out there. Or as you're writing the review, you can talk about characteristics that this factory or this brand have done in past releases and try to tie it together right now. So that's not to knock I think both have, I think when it comes to tasting, the blind review is going to be the superior way. Mm-hmm. But there are some disadvantages is what I'll say to it as well. And I think there's a place for both of them.
Very good point. I definitely agree. And picking certain elements from different types of reviews is a wonderful way to just get a more holistic view of the entire industry. And we also have to keep in mind, even though with blind tasting, you're getting rid of the preconceptions in regards to marketing or maybe the positioning of a certain brand. Ultimately, for the end consumer, that's part of the experience as well, right? Because no cigar apasionado, or hardly any apasionado, at the end is going to smoke a cigar blindly. And so the cigar ring, the box, all that makes for at least a little element of the overall experience.
Yeah, you know, there were a couple of funny #1 cigars that got #1 in Cigar Aficionado. Not funny, but unique ones. It was the Eye of the Shark, and the year before it was the La Flor Dominicana Andalusian Bull. Those are one-of-a-kind shapes. So I don't care how blind it is, unless you're smoking it blindfold, you're gonna look at that. Those are gonna stand out. There's just no way they can't. You know, I can see with some Toros and things like that, you know, and Robustos, but those cigars are gonna stand out no matter what's on that cigar.
A great question that Charlie sent earlier was, do you actually review different sizes of cigars of the same line or brand, for example, just to see the differences and how the blend might behave in various vitolas?
Yes. That's a very important point that will happen. So a size will be picked for the first review. And then other sizes will be explored down the line, and they're done in a shorter format that reference the old review. But we point out that I consider, if you get a Robusto and a Toro in a line, they are two separate cigars as far as I'm concerned, and they can perform very differently. That's, you know, because of leaf placement, you know, ring gauge, you know, all those things, lanes can factor into that. So it is very, you know, and I see sometimes people, they'll smoke something from a line and they'll say, this is the best line ever, right? Or they'll smoke one from a line and say, this is terrible. But if you haven't smoked all the cigars in that line, you really can't say. And some lines will just perform. Look at the Padron 64 is a great example of that. You know, the Opus X's are like that, you know. So I treat them separate, and I will review other sizes. I won't do them in one review because I find it could be a little overwhelming. So I think it's important to do that in individual reviews. And usually I'll do about 2 or 3 sizes if the line has some traction in the market. I'll go back to it. If the line I find really didn't have traction, I'm probably not going to go back and do that just because there's so many other cigars to review.
Speaking of new and people always looking for what's the next big thing, do you find yourself more often reaching for something that you're very familiar with? And do you have like certain cigars in your go-to stash, sort of the ones that have stood the test of time? Or are you also more looking for what's new, what's next, and try to taste something new and different every single time?
Yeah, it's tough blend wise to do that right now because there's just, there's only so much tobacco that's out there that's being produced. It's what I'll say is I liked, again, I go back to brand building. I like to see how the brand is building. So I'll tend to go to those. But I will explore a new brand from time to time. Whether I review that brand is another story, because usually I like to see the cigar somewhat in the market in usually about 50 stores, right, before you're going to do that. Because it's just, again, there's only so many cigars you can review, and you want people to be able to find a cigar you review. But I think it's important that you look at some of these other brands, whether it's a new brand, someone getting back into the business. Maybe there's a new factory that's on, Crown Heads went with that Juarez cigar a few years ago, and they kind of stumbled onto the Pichardo factory. And that's now a factory. We're seeing more and more cigars come out of Nicaragua right now, and they're doing some very unique things. Had I not smoked that Juarez, I probably wouldn't have not known about that factory. So it is important that you do that. I think reviewers sometimes on the online piece, they tend to go with the brands where they like the brand or like the person, which is fine, but sometimes it's at the expense of some other things that companies are doing. Or maybe, it's some of the bigger companies. Like I look at what Tabacalera USA Altadis has done in the US in the last couple of years. They've done some really unique projects, and sometimes I don't think they get the attention from social media because social media is so focused on these popular brands where they're connecting with the manufacturers. So you do have to, it's important. You shouldn't be ignoring that. You should be trying to be as wide as possible in what you're smoking. It's not easy sometimes when you do a lot of reviews, but it's important.
Do you feel like it's probably easier for the smaller brands to succeed on social because there's more personal connection between the end consumer and the people behind the brand?
I think in a way, when it comes to social, they can do that. But the bigger companies aren't solely dependent on that. Some of if a small brand gets a bad review on social media, it's going to have much more of an impact for them than if a big company gets it. Because the big company, they look at social media as one component, but there are a lot of people in cigar shops in the U.S. who never look at a Cigar Coop. They may not even look at a cigar aficionado. They just want to smoke something that they like. So, there's a whole other audience out there. But with a new boutique brand, it's tougher to do that unless your retail is really putting that cigar in their hands and really getting behind that cigar.
Brian, it's a pleasure to see you on the call again. I know it was early mornings for you earlier today, but still you managed to tune in. So I'm happy you got back. You also had a question, and I think it fits perfectly with what Coop was talking about just right now.
Yeah, that was my first ever 6 a.m. cigar experience. That's a new one. Tick that off the bucket list. Yeah, I had a question about boutique brands, and in reviewing if they tend to struggle against the more established companies, or if there's kind of a desire for that kind of thing, like indie films at the Oscars, how they always do really well.
There seems to be, that's a great point, Brian. Thanks for asking. I still think with the lists that people pay attention to, the Cigar Aficionado, Cigar Journal, it's tougher for those boutique brands to get up. And those are like the equivalent of the Oscars. I still think it's a little more difficult for those brands to get on the list. Not that they don't score well. Like I've seen some things in Cigar Aficionado score really well for a small brand, but when it comes to top 25, it doesn't make it for whatever reason. So I think they've struggled a little more than you would think. But the online piece has suddenly opened it up where someone could get a top 25 rating that they maybe wouldn't have been able to get 15 years ago. But I still think there's a lot more with that. The aficionados list is coming out in December. I'm really curious. There's a lot of small brands that have some scores that are going to qualify, but I just don't think they're going to make it this year. I just don't think they have the legs to do it right now. I think they're looking for, they're going to be around more. But these cigars, they'll do well on the online list for that reason.
Cool. I thought of another one. Do you have a lot of joy being able to do something with your work that you love so much, or is it such a job that it takes some of the pleasure out of it?
There are times I'm like, you just want to bang your head against the wall. Especially on the news piece when, you'll work with a company for 3 or 4 years and have a great relationship, and then a big publication calls them, and suddenly they won't talk to you about their release, right? Because the big publication asks for exclusivity on it, right? So that's frustrating. But when I look at the pluses and the minuses, there's so many more positives. I've gotten a chance to smoke some great cigars. I've gotten a chance to be on a forum like this, which I'm humbled and I'm honored that people, would tune in to hear me talk about something like that. So I don't want to ever lose sight of that. If I didn't have the audience, and I didn't have, both the positive and the negative comments, and there'll be negatives, I don't think it would drive me to do what I do. So, but there are times I got to admit, a couple of times I'm like, man, I got to rest my palate for 3 or 4 days. I just can't review this right now. But there are times, but it hasn't got to a point where I want out. I've never said I want out. So that, in 10 years. So that's something I would say is keeps me going.
Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Coop, how do you go about feedback that you get from end consumers and people who consume your content? A, is there a lot of it? And B, at the beginning, did you struggle with, in particular, negative feedback that you get? Because putting yourself out there on social media and putting your face in front of other people on the screen, it's not always that easy to sort of stand that judgment.
Yeah, most of the consumer feedback, I would say, is more positive. Some of it, as I went along, then you start seeing some of the negative. There's negative feedback you'll get a lot of times from the brand owners. And that's like what you don't see is when I put out my cigar of the year list, like you don't hear about all the phone calls I get, angry that someone's not on the list, right? Or if someone didn't get a 90, how upset they are, right? With that. So that part is, that's a little tricky. Some of the news stories I've taken some criticism too for. So, there was some stuff I wrote, and I normally don't get political, but Rudy Giuliani was a controversial article I wrote 4 years ago because everyone thought he was going to save the cigar industry. And I said, it ain't happening, right? And nothing against Giuliani. Personally, I lived in New York. He was my mayor and everything, but I wrote saying it wasn't going to happen, and I got more hate mail than I ever got for anything. That and when I gave Steve Saka a cigar in '89 were the two things I got more negative feedback. But you have to just take it professionally. If you're going to put something out there, you got to be prepared for criticism. And if you can't, then you probably shouldn't be doing this, is what I say.
Mm-hmm. And that's when we come back to what you mentioned earlier during the show, that you got to love the media side as much as you love the cigar aspect.
Right.
Was that always,
yeah.
Did you always have a particular interest in media and in journalism?
Yeah, what's funny? I lost track of it though. I actually was a journalist. I did a lot of journalism in high school. I married a woman who was a reporter for a while. She hasn't done that for a while. So I got very much into talk radio in the U.S., particularly sports talk radio. And that was a lot of I kept saying, when I went and started the podcast, I based a lot of it off sports radio models that we do. So I've always been interested in that type of stuff. And when I got into cigars, there was a natural, hey, I could take these things that I've liked over the years and apply it. So with a written piece, I use much more of a journalistic process. There's a process for how a review comes out. It's proofread, it's, things like that. With the shows, I based it on some things I learned from listening to so much radio in the 90s and 2000s that, so, and I liked it. So I knew if I could just take that and maybe people would be interested and maybe they wouldn't. That in the end, I think people like it. So I think I might have done something right.
We had an interesting question from Riot over in Dubai. Pleasure to have you, man. And please bring forward your question.
Absolutely.
Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Hope everyone's doing fine.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. I don't want to overemphasize the whole rating thing, but I was very curious because a lot of times, the whole thing of when you buy a stick, you make sure you buy 3 sticks. And I'd love to know your opinion about that. You can never judge a cigar from a single smoke. You want to try it for the second time and potentially for the third time. However, in tastings and blind tastings, you potentially go, to my humble understanding, with a single stick. So does that make sense? And the other question is, when you actually do let's say for the sake of argument, you did a rating on some cigar and you decided that was a 90 or that was an excellent one. And a month later, you smoke that cigar and you're like, oh no, I think I've done the wrong, whether in a positive or a negative way, rating. What are your thoughts on these 2 points?
Yeah, I think multiple cigar review, this is a great question. I think you do have to smoke a cigar more than once to review it. Now, I've seen with the blind sites, they tend to go 1 cigar. I don't know what Journal does if they send multiples to the reviewers or not, but a lot of the other blind sites have done 1. I know I can't do that. Now, the problem you mentioned is something I have put into my process, right? Where I try to spread out the smoking of those cigars, not to smoke them all in one day. So it takes a lot longer when someone sends me a cigar to get a review out, because I do try to avoid that case where it didn't smoke. Maybe it smoked really good the first time and didn't smoke good the next times, or vice versa. So I think that's extremely important to do that. And I try to do that consistent. And this is where you have to manage it, where, maybe smoke it and then I go back to it 21 days later. And always, here's what I do. The first cigar I smoke is not rated or scored. There's just some impressions I get from it. The second and the third ones are the ones that are going to go into the score. And then I can compare how much of a difference there is with that. So I think, again, when you have a process, there are ways to get around it, but I absolutely agree with you on that. It's so hard to do one. And then what do you do if you just have that cigar that falls apart for whatever reason? It's plugged, it cracks. Look, I just did a review where I had 5 cigars crack, right, in the review process, right? And they were under good humidity and everything. And that factored into the review. But if it's the first one that cracks, I'm like, or the second one, then I'm going to go back and kind of evaluate, was this just a one-off or not? Or was it happening consistently? So that's another thing. I think it's very important to just do more than 1 cigar.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Great question.
Because you spoke about the brand evolution before, which cigars or brands have aroused your interest or surprised you in various different ways recently?
I'm seeing there was a brand that came out about 7 years ago in the US called Crux. I don't think they've gotten a big hold in the international market yet, but Crux has been a brand. They're working with Plasencia. They have a very hands-on approach to what they're doing. They're a cigar that I think if that cigar was released 10 years ago before FDA, they would have really exploded, right, and been good. But I think FDA has kind of hurt them a bit in terms of what they can do right now. So that's one brand I think has caught my attention a lot. As far as what they're doing, I've been also looking at what McAuliffe's doing right now in the U.S. and maybe some of their initial blends I wasn't as high on, but some of the stuff that they're doing now, I see a lot better quality of what they're doing. So I think they're starting to kind of turn the corner with that. There are some small companies out there. There's Falto cigars. It's a brand out of Puerto Rico. They make their cigars at La Aurora. They're a small batch company, but they do very few releases. But every time they do a release, it's just fantastic, right? So there are some, and then there are just cigars that I just see, like for example, companies like Alec Bradley. I think the last 3 years, Alec Bradley's totally turned the corner, and they're making much better cigars, and they're getting my attention lately. Like they're doing better cigars now than when they got Cigar of the Year. So I'm paying a lot of attention to what they're doing right now.
So what does it take to sort of arouse your interest there? Do you also find yourself like looking for the controversial elements with particular brands, or certain even controversial aromatic profiles in the cigars?
I'll answer the first part at first. I got to think about the second part. The first part is I'm looking for, if a brand's getting my attention, it means I'm putting my money where my mouth is with that brand, and I'm buying a lot of that cigar, not just one, but I'm buying a lot of it. So that's what's going to get that. I don't necessarily try to look for something controversial with that. Excuse me. Something controversial may come up about it, but I haven't really had to hit that as much. So no, I don't think the second part I've looked for anything, and I don't think there's been anything really. I mean, the big controversial one over the last year was Steve Saka's Sobre Mesa Brulee, whether it was sweet tipped or not, and that was a big controversy in the States. But I didn't. When I reviewed it, I didn't go in there trying to ding that cigar because it had a sweet tip cap or not, and that was the controversy with it.
Now, U.S. market being one element of the entire show, do you also follow the international markets and what's happening over in Europe or Asia? Because we had Eric earlier today.
It's very important that I'm starting to do more of that. If you notice, Coop, if you kind of go into Coop, we've been reviewing a lot of the Vega Fina releases in Spain. So those are ones in there. We've increased Cuban coverage. We really weren't doing much with Cubans until a couple of years ago. So we're starting to do more of those. I start to seek out more of those types of cigars right now. So the Pacific market's one. The Asia Pacific market's probably the one I haven't tapped into enough yet. And that's one I definitely plan on doing. But definitely the European market. There's a lot of European-only releases, and I do try to get my hands on a lot of those right now. Because we do have an audience besides the U.S. that does that. So it is important to do that.
That's actually a very important aspect, because I think in the international markets, there's probably less media people, and there's not as many channels as there is in the United States to really follow what's going on with the industry. So I think there's huge potential there as well.
Yeah, I spent some time in Europe. I think I was telling you when we talked a couple of months ago, I was in Sweden and England a lot. And, particularly Sweden, I was seeing a lot of people smoke Vega Fina, and a lot of some of the boutique brands were making their way over there as well. So I was kind of getting really interested in I saw Vega Fina in Sweden, and the releases I didn't have here. I'm like, these are releases maybe people will pay attention to. One release was Vega Fina 1998, which came to the U.S. market this year. Yeah. But we were covering that a year earlier when it was released to Spain. And I was just fascinated, particularly when I was in England, of the smoking patterns I saw of people. It was very interesting. I remember I was in J.J. Fox one day, and it was interesting. I saw women smoking Liga Privadas and men smoking Cubans, like multiple people. And I just looked at it, I'm like, wow, it's something I wouldn't expect a lot of women to be smoking Liga Privadas. It was just, could have been the day I was in there. I'm not saying it's a trend, but I'm like looking at that, I'm like, that's something you just don't see here. So I was very interested with that.
In general, did you realize there's a lot of difference in the way people enjoy and appreciate cigars, or just in terms of the cigar culture in general, between Europe, Asia, and the US market?
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. The US market has a lot of these small shops with small cigar lounges, and they build up, more communities with that. And it seemed like when I was in Europe, and again, I'm going to have you guys correct me if I'm wrong, it seemed like it was a little more of an occasion to go to the cigar lounge. Well, in the U.S., people sometimes some people work. If they work remotely, they'll work in the cigar lounge all day, right? These people will be in the cigar lounge all day. But in Europe, it was a little more. At least I saw this in England. Maybe because I was in JJ Fox. Same with Sweden. I forget where I was in Sweden, but it seemed like it was a little more of a occasion to go out to the cigar lounges in those areas. And events were treated much more like events in Europe because there's so many events in the U.S. People are evented out in the U.S. Europe, when there's an event, it's something special, is what I've seen.
I think it really ties into cigars over here in Europe probably being a bit more of a luxurious element and part of a more, sort of upscale lifestyle, whereas in the US it's definitely an everyday treat, and you would find people from all walks of life enjoying cigars on a daily basis.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it has to do with some of the taxes, certainly. When I was in Sweden and buying a Vega Fina, which costs $19, that's a lot for Vega Fina. So yeah, so that, and I think that would definitely play into it. But people can go into a cigar shop, they can get a cigar for $2 or $3 here, and that could be their everyday cigar, and that's what they smoke in the lounge every day. Nothing wrong with that. There's some really good cigars you can get for $2 or $3 here. But that's the differences of what I saw.
Yeah. Coop, take a look ahead with me. Where do you see the industries headed next? Like, what are some of the things that worry you? What are other things that you might be hopeful for? What are the silver linings, and what's the crystal ball telling you?
I could speak from the U.S. We just had a major win, and we haven't had a lot of major wins on the whole substantial equivalence thing, which basically you were going to have to go through a testing process to determine that your cigar can be released in the market, is what that was all about. And it was preventing a lot of new stuff from being released. That's been at least put on hold right now indefinitely. So I think we're going to see a bit of explosion of new brands in the next year. I think COVID is probably slowing it down right now, is the only thing holding that back. But I think we're going to see this boom again. And what I mean boom is explosion of more new brands coming out in the next 18 months. Because I think people are still leery that decision could end up, especially with the change in presidents we're going to have here. They're not going to be as friendly towards the cigar industry. So I think there's going to be this short term with the new president coming in, with kind of the handcuffs taken off, that you're going to see people try to get this stuff into the market as fast as possible. I'm hoping that there's going to be quality with that, is what I'm hoping. I think we've had some quality issues in general in the last year. It's just like I said, COVID's had a lot to do with that. They've scaled back in production. But I think this is going to be something that we see there for at least the next 18 months. And then I'm kind of concerned when the new administration comes in, there's going to be something that's going to go against the industry again, and it's going to kind of come back on there. So, I think there's some other things to look forward to. We were talking to Carl. I know we both have talked to Carlito. Him going into Nicaragua is going to create a whole new excitement for Fuente. Not that they don't have excitement, they have a passionate base, but now you're going to have Fuente cigars coming out of Nicaragua. That's something to really look forward to. What are they going to do there? What's the, how are they going to do these blends? What's the tobacco going to be like? What are the brands going to be like? A lot of interest with that, Fuente Padron collaboration, huge. I mean, it's one of the most exciting things we've seen. But so I see the next 18 months really positive for the industry. I'm looking forward to that right now, what we're going to see.
And some of the challenges that you brought up are sort of a perfect segue to. You also have a role with CRA as an ambassador for them in your part of the United States. What's your perspective on the CRA cause at the moment, and how do you see the support and people being united under that umbrella to fight for their rights as cigar aficionados?
Unfortunately, we're not united. First of all, I'll say CRA is a very important thing, and they started from nothing, from ground zero, and they built up a good organization, and they have made a difference. Okay, a lot of these the lobbying efforts and some of the things that happened wouldn't have not happened without CRA. Have they done everything perfectly? Absolutely not. have they had total support? No, the industry is very divided right now. The CRA and the PCA, which is the Premium Cigar Association, they tend to be more aligned. And then the Cigar Association of America, which represents some of the more bigger manufacturers, they seem to be on a very different page. And not everyone's on the same page right now. And it's hurting right now because when they see an industry divided, particularly in Washington, D.C., they know who to go after. And they know who, they pit one against the other right now. So but we need to have CRA. Glenn Loop just stepped down as the executive director. I think they need to kind of eventually tell everyone what their roadmap is going forward. I'm confident they will. Though. So I'm not criticizing them, but I think they're going to have to do that because ultimately CRA's job is to get fundraising and represent the consumers, and it is important. CRA struggled in the U.S. because I don't think some retailers have gotten behind it and some retailers have not, and there's a lot who haven't gotten behind it, and I think that's hurt the efforts a lot because in the U.S. the consumers who go into these stores, they take their cue not from me, they take them from their retailer who they build a relationship with. And if the retailer is not talking CRA with them, they're not CRA members. It's pretty simple. And I think they need to improve the relationship. CRA needs to work on the relationship with the retailers for sure.
I sense a certain ambiguity, and what's interesting is that quite often we as cigar lovers, we pat ourselves on the shoulder as being part of an industry where all the people stand together, and it's the brothers and sisters of the leaf, and we're trying to be united by that wonderful product that is handmade premium cigars. Yet, as you rightfully mentioned, we're also facing dividing lines throughout the industry. Where do you think the industry has fallen short, or where could we improve to be a more united cigar family yet again, and to truly speak with one voice?
The problem is, I don't know if that will happen because I don't think, even with premium cigars, I don't think one size can fit all. So I think there may need to be different factions, but the factions they can't be sabotaging the other end. And I'm not saying that happens, but I've heard stories where it has been happening. So I think it is important that those factions kind of still work together in unison. You may not agree with what everything CAA is doing or the CRA is doing, but all right, let's respect that right now. Let's not go and take shots publicly or anything like that. Let's not do it. And there have been some little jabs that we've heard over the past couple of years on this right now. Mm-hmm. And I kind of think that needs to kind of stop. I think, like CRA, one thing that's really been helping, I think Pete Johnson's gotten involved with CRA a lot hands-on in the last year from Tatawahe. That was a great move, and Pete's really been, I think he's made a big difference already with Pete supporting it and unwaffling support right now. That's important. And people, like I said, because Pete's a guy who could appeal to a lot of different people. And I think we need a few more of those to stand up as well. Certainly Carlito's in that boat as well. He's supported everyone from the small guys to some of the bigger guys. So I think we need more voices like that. But it's going to take time. But I don't think we're ever going to get everyone on the same page. It's just a matter, we're going to have to. It's kind of like the politics in the U.S. We got to just respect the other side of the aisle. We can't just we can't just have this bickering and don't take the bickering into a public forum. Certainly.
Great points there. Absolutely. Besides that, if you were handed a handful of fairy dust, or if you could wish for a couple of things to improve in the cigar industry, if you could change something for the better, what would that be?
That's a great question. What would I do with that? I would say the first thing what I would do is get rid of the FDA. that would be the first thing I think we could do, is we can get rid of that. I think the industry has not done a good job at public relations. I think they've done a really bad job at public relations. And anti-tobacco in the U.S. has very good public relations behind them. And the cigar industry has not invested in public relations, mainstream public relations at all. And I think it would certainly help if that happened. where I could see some funding being used to just start a PR campaign and let's start getting this back in our favor right now, because anti-tobacco destroys us every time with this. So I think they need a public relations firm to do that. I think the Premium Cigar Association could certainly use that in the U.S. Improve the image of this whole industry, because there's good people in this industry, and there's good products, and there's a good story. So why can't we tell this good story and get someone to kind of take that message further? A couple of years ago, Rocky Patel did an interview on Fox News. It was fantastic. It was a 5-minute interview on a major show, but there was no momentum built after that, because I don't think anyone started to build on the momentum that was received there. And that's where a PR firm could have came in and say, all right, based on what Rocky said, let's launch these initiatives and these campaigns. That didn't happen. I understand it takes money, but if that's if the question is fairy dust and you could get money to do that, I would do it.
Another disruptive element that we're all facing, besides the current challenges with COVID, obviously, is digitalization on a broader level. It certainly changed the cigar media side. It certainly changed the cigar manufacturing side and the way cigars are branded, distributed, and brought to the market. How do you feel about keeping craftsmanship and tradition alive and treasure the art and culture that is premium cigars, but also make it applicable and relevant to 2020, soon 2021, and the modern digitalized world that we all live in?
Yeah, that's a great question. Because I think what we saw with the digital mediums in the last year with COVID have exploded. There's been a lot of shows and certainly my show's benefited. Your show's now started. There's all these shows that have started. I still think we need to do a better job at maybe telling the story of the cottage nature of this industry better on those forums. I know, for example, I've heard next year Puro Sabor is going to be doing some of that, where they're going to have virtual farm days and virtual factory days. I think we need to see more of that right now. I love the fact that we have a whole bunch of people in this room. It is great, right? This is a wonderful. I would not be talking to you guys if we didn't have this. But I think there's this other side of the story that needs to be told, and this message needs to be taken forward. Where I'd love to see, for example, Carlito one day do something from the farm, like something like that in a live setting. And I know it takes technology. Same with behind the scenes at Padron, get a little more of that art. And I know some people have done videos and stuff like that, but now you have a captured audience to do it with. And I would take advantage of that right now. And, and then these things are out there. There's a record of this forever. So you can continue to kind of promote that over the next year. But I think that piece has been missing from the digital mediums right now. And I think that's something I'd like to, that if that improves, that certainly could be a wonderful story to tell for not just people who follow cigars, but outside cigars.
Why do you think that has been missing to this day? Is it simply because the cigar industry is very traditional and sort of old-fashioned in many good ways and probably some negative ways?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of the old-fashioned. It's hard to teach a dog new tricks. I think that some of it coming from Central America and the Dominican, it makes it a little more challenging to do that live. Certainly because of internet and bandwidth and things like that. I think those are things that eventually could be overcome. So I think there's some inhibitors because that's where you would need to tell a lot of that story from, not necessarily if you don't have that, but there is, we need to see, like I said, I keep going back. I think what Carlito and Jeremiah and Jose, what they did this year was a big step, because they kind of, Fuente, there was this whole new world opened up with Fuente. We all smoked Fuente for years, but I know, like, when, the interviews we've done, suddenly I look at like Cameron Rapper completely different after talking to Jeremiah, or suddenly I look at Opus X completely different after talking to Carlito. So I know it could be done. I know it could be done. I just think it needs to go to that next step. And I think I think the technology is getting better where that some of that could start to happen right now. Where maybe like in 2012, the idea of doing a broadcast from a factory was probably impossible. But I think it's getting better right now with that.
So I believe you sort of answered the question already, but would you say that that extra element of digital, virtual, new and exciting media aspects coming to the industry would actually take away some of the charm and some of that artistic, handmade, sort of analog experience element? Or is it much rather going to be an extra layer sitting on top and just bringing added value?
Oh, I think it's gonna be extra layer. I mean, again, like when I go back and hearing Carlito tell the story of Opus X, I have not been to his facilities. I can't wait to go there, and I guarantee you, there's other consumers, even if they saw something virtually there, they say, you know what, I want to go there and actually see, smell, and taste this. So I think it would add this layer that, if anything, it would entice more people to do that. I don't think it will replace it, right? I don't think it will ever like we have the virtual events going on here right now. I don't think they'll ever replace the in-person event. Like it's right now, it's filling a role because of COVID, but ultimately, that's going to be. I think a lot of people are going to be excited to be with in-person events with a lot of people they've gotten to know that they may not have gotten to know before. So I think it's opportunity right now.
No, I couldn't agree more. Absolutely, and I'm thoroughly enjoying this conversation with you, Coop.
Dude, this is awesome. This is great.
And it absolutely speaks to everything you were just saying, and I also believe that that's going to be an added layer on top of everything else that we've enjoyed and appreciated about the cigar industry thus far. And in general, my perspective is that the most successful companies and brands moving forward, in no matter which industry, will be the ones that manage to perfectly align the analog and the digital experience world. And only if you manage to bring those together in a seamless and frictionless way, that's going to be where the key to success lies.
Yeah, I think the answer is they got to coexist. You don't want to like not have any digital presence, and at the same time you don't want digital to replace the in-person part. So I think the way it's going to be successful in like an ecosystem is the both ends play with each other, and I think combining the two will be something that's really beautiful, and it's going to open a whole other door to, like I said, people having access that they may not have had this type of access before.
Coop, if you were to start Cigar Coop once again from the very beginning, zero track record, and it's January 1st, 2021, you start all over again, what would you do differently?
I think the big thing I would do differently is and it goes back to brand building. I think I would be focusing more on releases and cigars that had more longevity, as opposed to taking the shortcut and putting something out there where a limited or small batch release or single store release that really isn't going to have legs over the next few years. And I had to make some very hard decisions on Cigar Coop over the last few years. Single store releases were really tough to cover. It's a tough market to cover. Half Wheel, they do an incredible job at it. I don't know how they do it, but it's a very tough market to cover because a lot of companies don't want to invest marketing cycles on a single store release. So they depend on the shop to do that. And the shop is not in the business of doing that. So they don't know how to do it. So I found it very, very frustrating to cover single store releases. And probably if I had to do it again, I wouldn't invest as much energy in that. I had to cut it back because it just wasn't working. I didn't see the return on investment, and there was just so much out there. So that would be one thing that I would start to do for sure. That would be different, as opposed to what I would do before. I think the other thing that I would have done differently is probably, I was gonna say, I think it took a while. I think I waited 3 years before I got into podcasting. I would say maybe bring that in earlier. I don't think I would do that. I think I would still keep it 3 years because again, there's a lot. You need to have a track record to start making those types of investments in video, which are very difficult to do that. So I think that would be the other piece that I would have done. I'd keep that piece. So I would say maybe focus it more on brands that I know people can get access to, because I know that those would be people, if they get access to it, they'll read about it and do it. Where I probably didn't do that at first, and it probably hurt me.
Interesting that you mentioned the podcast element. Now let's be honest. I mean, new social media platforms, new channels that are being opened up, it's all iterations of the very same communication vessels we as human beings use in order to exchange ideas and relay information, right? But out of personal interest, are there certain new media forms that particularly interest you, or do you jump on something new right away? Like when TikTok was released, did you jump right on that and try to get your feet wet there and get a little bit of a feel for it? Or would you just say, I found my communication channels and I'll stick with these?
Yeah, I didn't really jump on TikTok. So I'm not one to jump on the new technology. There may be, I was so like, I don't understand how TikTok would ever work in the cigar industry now. Now I'm starting to see it a little more. So I think I want to understand what those new platforms are to do that before I jump into it right now, to do that. But I think we need to be diverse with our platforms, because you got to remember, all these platforms are privately owned. And tomorrow they could say this podcast can't be on Facebook. That's a realistic thing that can happen. So you got to be prepared. Like Cigar Coop's prepared with that. We've thought about it. There are ways that we can get around that if we have to. We don't want that to happen. So, but we never want to be dependent on one platform. I've seen people try to use Instagram for their podcast, and I think it's putting a round peg into a square hole sometimes. I don't think Instagram's a good platform to deliver the type of podcast we do. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just think it's too difficult to find it and stuff like that. But there's other things that Instagram works really well for, so I think it's a matter of, if it works for what you're doing, then do it. Zoom was an example of something we did jump on. Cigar Coop, I believe, was the first podcast to go to Zoom. We went to Zoom in May of 1999. I'm sorry, 2019. What am I saying? 2019, May. We were doing our show on Google Hangouts. We knew that Google Hangouts was going to go away. We had to come up with another platform. I started doing some research, and I came across this thing, Zoom. I called up Zoom. They hadn't really done a lot with podcasts back then, right? And they came up with a solution for me, and we started using Zoom in May. Little did we know that a year later, like, Zoom would be, everyone knows how to use Zoom in the cigar industry. So that was one where we did jump on it, because we absolutely had a need to do that. We had to figure a way to get our live show out there and easy ways for our guests to connect. So I think it's a case by case basis, I'll say.
Brilliant advice right there. I think that's a great value bomb that you treasured us with in any case. Coop, I thoroughly enjoyed this, and we also want to be respectful of your time, obviously, and the time of all our dear friends and family around the world tuning in.
Sure.
We have another great guest, of course, next Wednesday. We're on it to welcome Hoji Blanco from Tabacalera Palma. So I hope you all will be joining us again next week. But Coop, before we wrap things off, one final question, because we spoke about the last 10 years of Cigar Coop, everything that you've experienced, the evolution of the industry. Where do you see Cigar Coop next? So 10 years from now, once you're celebrating your 20th, what's going to happen till then, and what do you have installed?
I've toyed with a print component still. I know it sounds crazy to say that, but we're still very much a print industry. There may be a point in the next few years I do this full time, and I think there'll be an opportunity for a print component to kind of go with that, because I think that's still the ultimate credibility to do that. So I think you'll see that piece happen. I think we'll also start exploring more of the lifestyle pieces of, like, we're very industry focused. We've started to branch out with lifestyle with our cigar music show that we do, Jukebox. We do that twice a month. So I think there's other opportunities. I know everyone does pairings, which is, I don't know if I'd ever do pairings because there's so much out there, but music's one. We're looking at sports down the road, and just maybe some other things where we explore more lifestyle type brands to have out there, because I think there's a big market for that. We're still not looking at that right now. And I expect like Cigar Coop, the website, to still be around in 10 years if I'm still around. So I'll be I'll be close to collecting Social Security by then. So
It's great to hear, Coop, and I'm pretty sure you will be there. You'll be rocking in 10 years from now,
yeah.
just as you do right now. And I thoroughly enjoy following the Cigar Coop journey. And I want to personally thank you for the tremendous value that you bring to the entire industry. So many thanks for your tremendous work, and many thanks for doing us the honors and joining us here at the Light 'em Up Lounge tonight for the special feature.
Great show.
no, thank you. Thank you. Oh, look at this. He was Jose was hiding in there.
No, I was here all the time. I was here all the
Oh,
time.
you weren't showing up on my screen.
Well, but I was here. And I'm going to say one last thing. I wasn't going to say anything, but I do have to say that.
Hey, Jose, be careful what you say, buddy. I'm getting Coop's back here.
Listen, Coop and I have been friends for more than 10 years, and Coop and I talk a lot. I know Reinhard and I talk a lot. He's one of the most honest, most trustworthy people in our industry. He is not a moocher. He's a guy who buys a cigar. He's a guy that gives everybody a fair chance, but he's also been very good for the industry. I think Coop has been one of the journalists / bloggers that have made small, medium-sized, and big company realize how important social media is. But social media that is done correct, with honesty, not being biased, and just trying to do the best for the industry. So I know that Coop and I, like every week, we talk 3 or 4 times. When there's a hot potato out there, we talk 2 or 3 times in the day. So Coop, keep up the great work. And my hat's off to you. And Reinhard, continue doing your great job, and everybody who tunes in every Wednesday. Thank you.
Many thanks.
Thank you, Jose. And I want to
Thanks
thank
a lot,
everyone.
Coop.
Everyone who tuned in. I really appreciate it and asked questions or just were here in the chat. Thank you so much. Meant a lot. And thanks for the opportunity, Reinhard.
An absolute pleasure. Many thanks for tuning in. And to all of you, have a great rest of the day. We wish you a wonderful Thanksgiving tomorrow. Happy holidays. And we'll see all of you next week here at Light 'em Up.